Hello, I'm Adam Orth. Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I'm speaking with Renee Gittins, Creative Director and CEO of indie game studio Stumbling Cat. In this episode, we discuss how video games entered her life through playing classic FPS titles with her father, a pivotal defining moment while demoing Potions: A Curious Tale at Geek Girl Con, how she started with the IGDA and the important work they did during the pandemic, the meticulous planning process of finding the right release date, the importance of the Steam front page, and how external factors negatively impacted its launch, and finally, her takeaways on the development journey and her advice for budding creatives and game developers. Hope you enjoy. Hey, Renee.
Hey.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excited to have you today. Excited to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and we'll jump right in.
Absolutely. So, hello, my name is Renee Gittins, and I am the CEO and creative director of Stumbling Cat, which is my own indie game studio based out of Seattle. We just shipped Potions: A Curious Tale, an adventure crafting game, and I've had about a decade-long career in the games industry across all sorts of roles, from engineering to production to executive management. I was last the general manager of Phoenix Labs Vancouver, and before that, I was the executive director of the International Game Developers Association.
Yes, you've had quite an interesting career. I know a lot about you, but I learned even more when I was doing my research for this podcast. And there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about. Um, you know, personally, what I know about you is you are an incredibly passionate game developer. You're incredibly passionate and outspoken about improving our industry. Obviously, your work with the IGDA is a big part of what you do, and that's actually how I first came to know you. And I just have been really impressed with all the stuff you've been doing. I want to congratulate you on Potions.
Thank
It's a
you.
super fun game. I've been playing it for the last few days alone and with my daughter, and we're having a great time with it. And it's not a game that I would normally find myself playing, but I'm completely sucked into it. The vibes are so good. I'm just really, really enjoying it, and I want to talk a lot about it, actually. But what I like to do in this podcast is kind of go back to the beginning a bit and try to, talk to, the guests about, where did video games start for you and what was the kind of creative spark that took you into wanting to do this? Like, how did video games enter your life?
Absolutely. So, most people wouldn't expect this, but video games entered my life as first-person shooters, playing on the PC with my dad, actually. So, my father introduced me to Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, then Duke Nukem 3D, and then I played Pokemon Yellow. So that's sort of how I broke out of my original first person shooter streak. But when I played the original Half Life, I was completely blown away by what games could be. Like, they could be such an immersive experience with rich storytelling that makes you feel like you're really part of the game, but it's all told through the experience of the game itself. And I've been hooked on video games ever since. I've been playing games probably since I was 4 or 5. But when I played Half Life, 8 or 9, I think. That's when I truly became like the one of the most passionate game fans, and that certainly evolved over time. I've started playing more RPGs and eventually MMOs and all sorts of genres. Probably the only thing I don't enjoy a ton is RTSs. Um, and I became an avid fan in terms of creating cosplays, participating in online communities, writing guides for like League of Legends. But I didn't actually know I could be a game developer. That was just not something that I had really been aware of for some reason. And so it wasn't until my senior year of college when I first met game developers, other game developers, that I decided I was going to somehow wrangle my mechanical engineering degree into getting me into the games industry. It took a couple years, but I eventually managed to.
What was it about Half-Life that really kind of opened your eyes? I mean, Half-Life is a very well understood bar of excellence and creativity, and it's really interesting to hear. I always find it really interesting because I had a very eye-opening experience when Half-Life came out myself personally, and I always like to hear what it was about that game and that experience that really kind of put people on the path, because there's very few people making games that haven't played Half-Life and have not been just completely blown away by that and what it evolved
Absolutely.
into.
Yeah, I think the tutorial, like the long tutorial introduction of starting out as just sort of a guy going to work, and it's slowly becoming more and more intense until the experiment disaster is like a really great way to set up the game. They could have just dropped you in at the experiment disaster and sort of done tutorial stuff after that, but having that whole ramp up makes it like so much more intense. I think in general the scripted events throughout the game feel so natural and part of the world. Like, the combination of level design and the events that happen, you don't feel like you're being railroaded at any point in time, even though you're clearly like guided along the right path. And I think they just did such a wonderful job with that. And then I think the final thing that really impressed me was there are a lot of puzzles in Half-Life, but they are always presented as really part of the world. Like, you are trying to clear the missile silo, launch the missile, and you have to go through tasks to do that. Whereas in previous first-person shooters, like with Doom, it's sort of like go find the button in the room and press the button, where it felt a little more surface level and not so involved with the world. So all those things really impressed me.
Yeah, really cinematic um, experience that never kind of pulls you out into, oh, I'm playing a game, you
Yeah.
know?
And so
And
responsive too, right?
yeah,
Shooting walls leaves bullet holes, hitting metal makes banging, clanging sounds, like all of that.
yeah, I mean, obviously, like I said, it's a high watermark in video games, but it's almost like people, like, I've never worked on a video game myself where Half-Life or Half-Life 2 tutorial was not referenced in how we're going to do a tutorial, right? Every game starts out, all right, tutorial is going to be like Half-Life style. We're not going to have any cinematics. It's going to be all in game. That never works, but thankfully, Half-Life exists to kind of inspire a whole generation of gamers. So it's really interesting. So was Half-Life the kind of thing that you know set you on the path to the? I know you talked about using your degree to kind of get down there, but was Half-Life the kind of channel to get you in there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly Half-Life made me fall in love with games. Probably where my true passion came together uh, are like action adventure fantasy games. Like Fable. I really love the original Fable. Like that did so much for me. I'm an avid fantasy reader. Like I was definitely the kid who sat in the back of class reading fantasy books under the table when even in later high school when people were texting under the table, I was still back there with my fantasy books because I just love those worlds and explorations. And that's sort of what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring people to those worlds and have them experience them. And when I heard that could be the case, I was chomping at the bit for those opportunities. And I was originally kicking myself because I had almost switched my degree to computer science, and it's like, oh, I don't want to sit in front of a computer all day. I like prototyping with my hands. But then I figured out I could make video games. I was like, I should have switched to computer science. It would have been a bit more of a useful degree for me.
Well, it worked out in the end. We can say that. But in doing my research, I went through your whole kind of professional career path, and one thing I did not know about you is that you were a cadet in the U.S. Army.
I was.
And how did that come about? After your kind of getting your degree and kind of saying, this is something I'm interested in. Like, how did that happen? And did any of that inform how you think or feel or make games today?
Yeah, that's a really wonderful question. My exploration into the US military was mostly to pay for college. I had decided that I wanted to go to my college, Harvey Mudd College, and it was an extremely expensive school. I think at the time that I started, this was like in 2008, um, tuition and everything else was like 65 to 70K a year. And that was a lot. And I didn't think I would necessarily be able to afford it. And I wasn't actually sure. I think I wanted to go into biomechanical engineering. So that's actually where I started my career. And I figured, well, if the military will pay for my degree, perhaps that would help take some pressure off. And I would also get some, hands-on engineering experience. My first year in the program, I certainly learned a lot. I think it was a wonderful experience, but I was a little disheartened to learn a bunch of things about the military. The rate of sexual assault of female members of the military is really high. At the time, women weren't allowed in direct combat situations. That was just something that I had to keep in mind in terms of, how I could be effective within the organization. And then they actually really heavily weighted your placement based on your GPA. No matter what school you got your degree from. And Harvey Mudd College is very well known for having an uninflated GPA, which means in the school's 70-year history, they've only had 4 or 5 straight A students. So it's actually very hard to get a high GPA there. And it meant that other people who are getting degrees might have actually been able to get into like the engineering core, which is one of the most demanded cores, and like knock me out just because I went to a top engineering school, but that had harsh grades. So those were all very dissuading from me continuing with my military career. And I decided I'd rather take on additional debt and tackle it myself.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to have gone through that. Kind of reading up a bit on it, not necessarily about you, but reading up a bit on it. Um, it's very, you know, it's a hard thing to do, and it's interesting to hear that that's that's a path you chose to kind of pursue your, you know, getting your degree. It's very, very admirable, I have to say. Um, so, from from there, you kind of branch out into some really interesting stuff that, again, I didn't know about you. Um, a lot of industrial design and biotech engineering. Talk about that, and talk about how that kind of kept you on the path, maybe, and got you moving through, because you do have these really interesting stops along the way to where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Prior to learning about the potential of being a game developer, my goal was to become a biomechanical engineer with a focus in prosthetics. And so when I was unable to get a game industry job straight out of college, I decided to pursue that biotech career path and was able to find various roles there. When I had moved to Seattle and worked at X2 Biosystems, I was under a really wonderful CEO there. And he respected me greatly as a system and design engineer. I was able to do a lot of cool work there. And as that work started to come to like the next sections, as the like hardware was being really locked down, he allowed me to explore switching to the software team. And so I taught myself programming on the side. I had taken like an intro class in college, but I really dove into it. And then I was doing both full stack HIPAA compliant web development within biotech, but I also was able to make some mini games to help with performing tests that would be more difficult to do on the field with children in particular. There's a series of tests, unfortunately named the SCAT, which is like standardized concussion assessment tests. And those require people to do things like say the months of the year backwards in order, starting with December, which
I can't even do that.
yeah, pee-wee football kids are not going to perform consistently on that as they're learning. So I made mini games for like pattern matching, like tap the blue butterfly sort of things, and that was sort of my first professional experience with game development, and I was hooked. I mean, I already knew that I loved game development, but it was great to do it professionally. And while I was there, I was also volunteering or working pro bono for an indie studio in the evenings and networking aggressively within the Seattle games community, which is really where I got my start.
Yeah, it's interesting because in your timeline, right around that point, you start splitting off into production.
Yeah.
Um, another place where I knew you from is Supernatural, the VR AR kind of fitness startup, now owned by Meta, um, with an insanely great product, doing really cool stuff there. Talk a little bit about that, because I always love hearing about people who are making traditional games or trying to make traditional games, and then going into VR and AR, because it's such a reset of your kind of knowledge base, and you have to like really rethink all the things that we normally kind of take for granted in game development. So how did you kind of get into Supernatural, and the production track, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. One of the appeals of production to me is that I enjoy empowering other people. And I think that it takes a lot of knowledge in order to do that effectively. So I felt like my experience as an engineer and my other experiences really assisted me in being an effective producer because it allowed me to communicate with people directly about the tasks and problems that they were facing, which helped with all sorts of things, critical paths, timelines, estimates, and being empathetic, right? Being somebody that they felt that they could talk to very clearly about the problems they were facing. Um, And I think I will always be a producer at heart, honestly. I just have gained more and more knowledge to be a more and more effective one. When it comes to AR and VR, I actually started my exploration there a bit earlier than at Supernatural. I had been working with Foundry 10, which is actually Gabe Newell's nonprofit that researches alternative learning. And I was working with them on both their game program as well as their VR and education program. And so I was getting my hands on very first editions of headsets, even before they were available to the public, both to work with teachers on testing how those would benefit classrooms and working with students to help them with developing VR programs and AR. We got a HoloLens as well. So I was very passionate there. And I also assisted a company I had done a bit of work for, Carbon Games, on AirMech and AirMech Command. And so AirMech Command
Name's
was one
green.
of, yeah, Oculus Rift launch titles, and so I also happened to go to the Oculus Rift launch event at GDC, and it was there that I noticed really surprising things in terms of how people engaged in VR and how some developers viewed VR, and that is they viewed it as cutting edge technology and forgot that people can be really bad. And so there were tons of games that didn't have any consideration for moderation, where people could invade your space, touch you, yell at you, and you had no ability to stop them from any of these things. So I started advocating for social virtuality best practices, did a few talks on it, wrote a white paper on it. And with all of that VR background, Supernatural was very interested in having me join their team as a technical product manager, where I did both production and product development work for them.
Yeah, really, really amazing company. I've always been really impressed by what they're doing. Um,
Absolutely.
it's fun. We use it around the house quite a bit. Um, so without kind of like spoiling the next part, you're already kind of working on excuse me, on potions, I guess, at this point in time, right?
Yeah. I started potions almost immediately after leaving biotech. I actually wasn't sure if I wanted to be a engineer, a producer, or a designer, and I felt the best way to do that was to
Make
design
a
a game
game.
and see if I liked it. And I also knew that portfolio pieces were really important. So Potions was started as an exploration of game design and intended to only be a portfolio piece. It's just that people were really excited about it. And so every time I saw people and told them about this portfolio piece, um, they would get really, really excited, and they'd always ask me lots of questions about it. And so I'd actually decided to see if it was going to be potentially commercially viable. And so I spun up a Kickstarter, and that ultimately was successful, though, like by the skin of my teeth, successful. I think it funded with 15 minutes left.
Wow.
Uh, and yeah, and then it became something I felt like I absolutely had to do. It was something that I wanted to do, but I wanted to be sure that I would fulfill that promise to those backers.
So you're kind of working at Supernatural. You've spun up this Kickstarter. You know, you're making a game on the side,
Yeah.
assuming at nights and weekends, like many of us. Um, and that's going along. You're taking the game to shows and getting feedback on builds from people. I when I was doing my research and some of the research that was provided to me by these great producers who help us do the podcast, um, I want to read a little quote. After seeing how passionately girls responded to the concept, I wanted to make sure the story, mechanics, and overall design did all it could to encourage them to enjoy games, pursue their dreams, and recognize their own personal strengths. This quote was taken from an interview where you were describing. I can't remember the event
Geek
So
Girl
part
Con.
yes,
Yeah.
and you had a really positive moment described in the article about you know meeting a little girl who was wearing a witch outfit, and she said, "That's me," in relation to your game, and that's like, as creatives and game makers, we all look for that. Like that's the ultimate goal. And so after this quote from you, like talk a little bit about how that kind of fueled what the game was either already on the path to becoming, or maybe that moment is kind of like a realization that there's something bigger here that you want to do besides just make a game.
Yeah, it was absolutely a moment of realization. Prior to that point, I had considered this an adventure game, an action adventure crafting game. And I thought that my main audience would be roughly the audience of Zelda games, people who liked similar, top down action adventure puzzly games. Um, I guess I had discounted that I was designing it from my own experiences as a woman, and I was really making it for 12-year-old me, who, though tomboyish, was definitely a girl. Um, and so when I demoed the game at PAX, like I got interesting feedback. Like some people were interested, some people thought it was cool. But then a couple of months later, I demoed it at Geek Girl Con, and that was a completely different experience. Like I had a horde of young girls in front of my booth, just absolutely gushing over this concept. And at the time, I hadn't actually thought that they were my core audience. I had it seems silly reflecting back on a game with a 12-year-old witch as the main character and based on fairy tales and folklore. But I really honestly didn't realize how well that they would connect to it. And at that point, I realized it was more than just a game with interesting explorations of mechanics. Like my original vision for potions was um, a counterbalance to so many games where you're told you're a hero and you're supposed to slaughter every fluffy bunny you see, like because that doesn't seem like very heroic behavior to me. And so like the
Yeah,
whole
you
potions
must kill a
mechanic.
thousand people to be the hero.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to do a game where you didn't have to slaughter everything to be a hero, and where creative problem solving was actually a much more effective way to go about things. Um, and seeing how much that resonated, and how some of these girls not only looked up to Luna but looked up to me as a game developer. I realized I wanted to make sure that the storyline and everything I did was as empowering as possible for them. And I think that that has worked because the feedback that I've gotten so far is it resonates very, very well with that audience because they
I mean,
do
it did in
feel
my house with my 12-year-old.
awesome.
Very, very, very powerful um, experience, and very clearly a part of the make and the DNA of this wonderful game you've made.
Thank you. And something I think is important about this is I designed it with consideration for them as an audience, but I didn't like I feel too often when people aim to make a game with a younger target audience that they reduce the complexity or the word choice or anything else. Uh, from devouring all these fantasy books as a child, I always felt that they pulled me up with their knowledge,
Mm.
versus being reduced to my current level of education. And I wanted potions to be that. I wanted it to teach them new things, to teach them new words, to challenge them, and certainly I made sure it was not using swear words or violence or any more of the darker themes, but that it was still very challenging as a title.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that from my experience with the game, you've definitely achieved that. it's uh it's pretty obvious that that's part of what you're going for, and it like I said, you know it's not something I would normally pick up and play, but I really enjoyed every minute that I've had with it. And it was just very like it as as a man, not a 12-year-old girl. It was relaxing and like enjoyable. I got sucked into the story and the puzzles and all the crafting. But I also can see those really cool elements that you're talking about, specifically the bringing you up rather than kind of holding you back you know, at a certain kind of, you know, in a reductive way that I think a lot of games aimed at younger audiences do often. And you know, going back to Half-Life, you said you played Half-Life at age 8 or 9,
Yep.
and that certainly didn't is not a game that is made for that age group. So that's that's an informative experience where you can point right back to and say, you know, this this thing that I played at a very young age that didn't talk over me in a way really informed how you make games. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's good to be challenged in a safe environment, like safe
Mm.
to fail. Like, right, like potions, you can faint. I don't know if you want to call it die or not. And all you lose are whatever things you have in your satchel with you. Um, but it still encourages you to explore and make mistakes and use the wrong potion, and it doesn't handhold you. It gives you hints, but when you figure out the solution to those hints, they feel more like your own victory than the game telling you what to do.
Yep, I definitely did not felt like I was being handheld, and there were definite like I have to figure this out, and like really really interesting uh, map and puzzle design choices. Very fun game. Okay, so you're making this game on the side. You're working at Supernatural, and then the IDGA comes into your life. Like this is
Yeah.
a very important part of your story and who you are as a person. So I really want to hear about how that all happened and how you're doing that and you're making a game on the side and you're obviously not making the game by yourself based on the credits that are in the game and what I know of people who've worked on it. So you know you're actually running an indie dev team making a game, you know, and doing all these other things, which is great. So let us hear about how you started with IDGA and how important that is to you.
Yeah. So I think I was so lucky to start my game industry career in the Seattle area because Seattle has so many great communities and resources for supporting game developers, connections and development and networking. And one of those groups is IGDA Seattle. So I early in my career explorations, was attending lots of events, and the IGDA Seattle team had a booth at a conference, and I came up to the booth and was like, "Hey, I like what you all have been doing with these events. These are how I think you could improve them and make them more interesting, accessible. Like, this is how you can improve the networking at them." And the response was, "Would you like to come to our next board meeting?" So from about that time on, I ended up joining the IGDA Seattle Board of Directors and helping plan local events for game developers. And for me, that was really wonderful because even just a few years into my career, I had received so much mentorship and guidance and encouragement and support from other game developers that being able to give back to that community by running events and providing resources was something I really enjoyed. So as I was actually about to leave Seattle for the job at Supernatural, there was the board of director elections, the international board of director elections, and I ran for that and was appointed with very flattering approval ratings. I think like 72% of people voted for me to join the board of directors, which I thought was really great. And from then on, I put so much of my passion into helping the games industry. At that point, I had already published a paper, or just about published a paper on the social virtuality best practices. I wanted to provide really clear guidance and resources to make developers' lives easier and to make game players' experiences better. And while not too long after leaving Supernatural, the Jen McLean stepped down as the executive director of the IGDA, and I applied for that role and was ultimately appointed to even further help the games industry as the executive director, and that that was such an honor to be able to assist game developers, particularly because not too long into my tenure, the pandemic hit, and we were able to create so many free resources to help developers and studios figure out remote work, mental health, remote team management, guiding communities through crisis, all sorts of really difficult things. Um, and I'm really, really glad for my tenure there, because I felt like I was able to really give back to this industry that's done so much for me.
There's quite a few people who are going to listen to this podcast who don't even know what the organization is or what the organization does. Why don't you give a huge advertisement for that right now, because it is an important thing, and I feel like not enough people are either aware of it or are members or even utilize it, and it's an important thing for our industry, and now more than ever our industry needs people in the industry sticking up for our industry, right? It's a it is a incredibly um, I don't even know what the right word is to be nice about trying to describe what's going on in the game industry right now.
Dark
Um,
times, yeah.
Darkness is putting it lightly, no pun intended. So yeah, tell everyone about it, just so we can
Yeah.
shake the tree and get some more people in there.
So the IGDA is the International Game Developers Association. It's the largest nonprofit membership association in the world that supports and empowers game developers in achieving fulfilling and sustainable careers. And it does that through many paths. One is through communities. There are like 180 local chapters across the world. IGA Seattle is one of them, but they are everywhere. They're in Japan, in Italy, in Finland, in South America. There is also the special interest groups, which are both affinity, advocacy, and discipline based. So you have game writers, game designers, quality assurance, localization. You also have women in games, LGBTQIA plus, and then you have like the climate special interest groups and other advocacy based special interest groups as well. The IGDA provides a lot of free resources. If you go to igda.org right now, you can go to the resource library and access all of the white papers I've ever written. I think there's like 4 of them on there, as well as a lot of other really great resources, from IP law to game design recommendations to business recommendations. It's a lot of really great information. And then finally, the IGDA advocates for game developers. Um, we stand up when people say incorrect things like playing video games causes violence, and we try to be a voice for game developers. And that's actually how the IGDA was formed, when the 1994 case was happening about appropriate violence in video games. It was debated from the position of two companies fighting with each other, and not at all was there a voice talking about the art and design of game developers, like what was actually going into the product as a vision, as a medium. And that's what encouraged the initial formation of the IGDA, was to ensure that someone was speaking for developers, for individual developers and their disciplines and passions.
There you go, everyone. You heard it right from the source. It's a very important organization within our industry. And if you're not a part of it or you haven't read up on it, I strongly encourage you to do so because, like I said, at this time, everyone needs all the help they can get. And it's a very helpful organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a ton of free resources, and
Yeah.
membership is only $60 a year.
Yeah.
Unless you're a student or in an emerging market, then it's only $30. So it's
And
very accessible.
most game companies will pay your yearly due as part
Yep.
of your package. I mean, it's pretty easy to negotiate a yearly $60 for that, and well worth it. Okay, so at this point, you know, you've gone on to work at Phoenix, general manager of, a really well respected game developer, but this game is clawing at you. You got to get it out.
Yeah.
So when did the shift happen to kind of go all in and get this thing finished? Like what was the status in your life at that point where you're just like, we've been working on this for a bunch of years. It's well beyond a passion project right now. We have a team, we have a company, we're making this game and it's coming out. So
Yeah.
how did that happen?
So it was pretty close to initial content complete when I decided to leave Phoenix. With Phoenix Labs, we had just gone through an M&A process that led to an investor-backed management buyout, and it felt like a good ribbon on my time there. And I thought that it was a good time to sort of go back to my roots with this game, so close to being done, because what it really needed was that final, really aggressive polish pass, particularly sort of working on a game. I wouldn't say haphazardly, but almost sporadically, just a couple hours every day, more hours on the weekends. It's hard to get like a true feel of the cohesive product and to ensure that the player experience feels really good. And so I decided to leave Phoenix and to just focus on that. And it ended up even being more work than I expected. I honestly, I crunched myself pretty badly up to the launch, and I think it was completely worth it. Like I said, the main content was done, but it was adding in all of the little quality of life things that made potions feel smooth, like feeling like it wasn't holding your hand, but it was giving you little hints. Like you never felt truly lost and confused because there was just enough to go off of. That required a lot of play testing and iteration and, yeah, consideration and work. As well as there's over like 56 puzzles in the game. And I think at the time where I was content complete, it wasn't 56 puzzles, it was like 18. So a lot of that last push was really enriching the world with more, uh, not just puzzles, but like special things in each level. I actually have like a huge document where I'm breaking down like 4 or 5 types of unique things that can happen in each level, and ensuring each level had enough of those to not feel empty, to feel that like there was something worth exploring for.
Yeah, it definitely feels super full and rich in that way. Very, like I said, very satisfying, very fun to just sit on the couch and go between Steam Deck and the TV. My daughter refuses to look at a big TV. She's got to look at the small screen. That's just how it is now, I guess. Um, I need to look at the big screen for a bunch of reasons. Um, and games really fun on the Steam Deck too.
Yeah.
Um, so so you're getting all these quality life things. You're getting near the end. You're getting ready to release it. Talk about like why you released it on the day you released it and all of the work that kind of went up to that day, because as we all know, there's a twist to this story. And I want to really hear about the lead up to that, because I really want our listeners to hear how devastating something like that can be when it's completely unknown, completely out of your power, and the absolute fucking resilience that you showed in the face of all that, which is so unbelievably admirable. I've been through something similar to that, and watching you handle it was really inspiring, and you know totally rooting for it. I know we talked a little bit during that time, but you know leading up to that, like, talk about like getting near the finish line and getting that all set up so people can really, who haven't really heard the whole story, can really understand um how personally devastating something like this can be when you're putting your entire life and 10 years into making games. 'Cause I can assure you, and you know this, but when you make a game, especially if you're an independent developer, it's everything to you. It is all encompassing. It's all you think about, and it's your hopes and dreams and your art and your creativity and your person and the people that you're working with. It's this huge effort to make this thing come to life, which, by the way, you did. Congratulations, right? You shipped an incredible game. And so walk us through that last kind of push and setting it up and choosing the day and all of that.
Yeah. So when I had a good sense that it would be finished soon, truly, I was looking at various launch dates. I had initially considered October because, witchy vibes, maybe that could have worked. But fall of like Q3 of 2023 might have well been Q4 of 2023 with all of the great game releases, Baldur's Gate, Starfield, etc. Um, and so
Did
as I
you
was
did you feel that like your game would be harmed by the big known releases in terms of like, pulling people away or discovery or anything
I,
like that?
yeah, I mean, I thought it would only be harmed in terms of access to press coverage,
Mm,
which, you know, has, if you get the right articles, has a good marketing effect, and
yeah.
otherwise it's not huge. But I wanted to set everything up for the best success, right? And as I was considering when to push the game out to, I was looking, January is a little too early. Okay, maybe I could do February. Oh, wait, March is Women's History Month. And this is a game made by a woman for girls about a girl. Like, that has to be it. And International Women's Day was right there.
That's
March,
perfect.
yeah, March, gosh, 8th, I think. And so what I decided to do was to launch the game on International Women's Day, depending on your time zone. So it was technically the day before International Women's Day in the US, but it was in International Women's Day for like Japan. Um, and that's because if I had launched it 10 a.m. International Women's Day. For the US, it would have been after National Women's Day for these other countries. And I am absolutely a very meticulous person when it comes to these things. Like, I wasn't like, that sounds like a good date. Sounds good. I
It's
was
like
looking at,
fate.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at SteamDB. I was tracking like all the other games that were launching. I had like estimation spreadsheets of if I could get on the front page, how long I could stay on the front page in New and Rising. And before the launch, I ended up actually having a viral TikTok that
Yep.
had a ton of support. And that bumped my wish lists to 25,000
Wow.
about maybe 28,000. Regardless, generally when you're aiming to launch an indie game, you're looking to have between 7 and 10,000 wish lists for your launch day, because that nearly guarantees that you'll be on Steam's New and Rising list, depending on who else is launching. With 25,000, I was like pretty set. Like, it was basically guaranteed. And with my estimates, I should have been on the Steam front page for 3 to 4 days. You can generally expect to get 1 to 2 million impressions every day, with thousands of wish lists and hundreds of sales. As an indie developer, getting your initial sales are really important. The sooner that you get to about $100,000 US in net revenue, the happier you make the Steam algorithms and push your game to other people. So getting that initial traction is super important, and then it can help you get in the discovery queue and pushed out to other people. I reference How to Market a Game and the Game Discover Co. Information a ton, because it's really useful in breaking down statistics for making games successful. I won't get too far into that, but
Well, I
regardless,
actually I think it's really important because we still live in a world where people think I can just make a game and put it out
yeah.
and people are going to find it.
No, I was planning on I was starting launch plans 9 months before I launched, and had already done initial launch planning before that. And then
You
I
should
was pretty
absolutely
much,
do a talk about this.
yeah, I was
You
pretty much
really should.
full bore into it the last 3 months. Like, anytime I was working on code during those last 3 months, I was like, this is wrong. I should not be touching my game right now. It should be all marketing. I had used Sully Gnome to find influencers who had streamed similar games. And so, in addition to Stride PR, my PR team reaching out to press and influencers, I was personally reaching out to influencers with notes about, like, if they had a cat, the cat's name, and like things to make me seem like an actual human being and not just a bot messaging them, which certainly increases coverage rates. But I was really confident going into launch day. I had set up pretty much everything perfectly. Like, I had a huge amount of wish lists. I had built a bunch of hype. I had gotten good press coverage, and based on all of the games that were announced to be released that day, I was set.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
feel like I mean, obviously I know you and I follow you in a bunch of places and we're connected, but um I mean, I heard about that game a lot, you know?
I was
Like
I was very
like
loud.
more yeah, but I mean, I kind of heard about it more than than the Hellblade game that just came out on Xbox, right? It's like so you had a very mighty presence and mission, and you've you've done everything perfectly. You're set, your day comes, it's the big day. What happens?
My numbers were really low, and I didn't know why. I was like, I had actually resisted from looking at my numbers, because I can obsessively check things like that. And I just tried to give myself space. And so I gave myself space, and I looked into it, and they were like 30% of what I would have reasonably predicted. And I tend to be conservative on my estimates. And I looked into it, and somebody on Twitter had posted, maybe somebody had messaged me, and it said, wow, EA just launched 11 games. Some indie's going to be really sad today. And I looked into it, and that's what actually had happened. Just a couple hours after I released Potions, EA unannounced dropped 11 titles from their back catalog onto Steam for the first time. And even though some of those were in packs where if you buy one, you get like seven, they each took up an individual slot on the front page. And the Steam new and trending list is ordered by time, unless you get like a viral bump, which are really
Yeah.
short. Um, and so if I had launched my game like 4 hours later, I would have been on the front page. But I launched it and they almost immediately knocked me off. And I was absolutely distraught
Yeah,
because I think,
I remember that happening. I remember
yeah,
seeing that on Twitter. Not necessarily what you're talking about, but I remember seeing all these EA games dropping, and I was like, just like that, like shadow drops, like nothing, like that was wild. And also some of those are really great games.
yeah, absolutely.
And then I started seeing stuff about you, right? You were starting to post, and other people were mentioning this, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. And knowing you, I said to myself, oh, she's gonna turn this into a positive. She's gonna get out there and figure it out and make it work, because that's what you do, right? That's what everyone does, but that's definitely what you do, right? I think we all know this about you. You're very visible. You're very out there. You're very open and transparent about what you're doing. So, I was like, okay, this probably isn't that bad. She's going to figure this out and turn it around. And then it just kind of started getting worse.
Yeah. What what happened was I definitely did talk about it. And I certainly was feeling emotions. Like I posted on Twitter, that was fine. But I also posted on TikTok. Uh, and in that video, I actually didn't talk about potions. I said, you know what sucks about being a game developer? You
Yeah.
can spend 10 years working on a project and set up everything for success, pick a perfect date, do all of your marketing. And then EA out of nowhere can drop 11 games and completely ruin all of your work. I showed that. And at the end, I said, so happy International Women's Day.
Yep.
Thanks. And
Very I
yeah,
saw that video probably very shortly after you put it out. And, from a friend and a developer, obviously, that's the worst thing. And it just kind of started steamrolling after that, because you were honest and real and vulnerable in a world that a lot of times just doesn't value that, you know and it's always turned into a negative when when someone shows themselves like that. I don't think I can think of any recent examples of someone you know being as vulnerable honestly like that, like you were, and having the world rally behind them. It just, it's a sad indictment of, you know, there's a whole other podcast, I guess, but, you know, but
yeah,
it was very, very disheartening to see, because, like, there are you know, some consumers are just not, they're not willing to support. They're there to be negative, and, you know, again, I've experienced this personally on a very large scale. And, it's the problem of anonymity, right? You can do and say whatever you want without any repercussions. So, you put this video out, and then what happens?
Initially, it starts getting a ton of support,
Yep.
you know, um, and
The entire game development community rallies around you
absolutely,
instantly.
instantly, and I'm so thankful for that. It was really wonderful to see the support. Um, However, as you're probably aware, the way that these algorithms work is they start with people in your community. And if they like it, it's people in similar communities. And then in people in slightly less similar communities. Then they check out how this community responds. It turns out that there was a certain community that responded a lot, um, had lots and lots of engagement with my post. And that was a community of, I imagine, mostly men who were very upset that I said Happy International Women's Day and very much hated that I cried, um, and decided that they wanted to tear me down. So it went from all of these supportive comments into like this massive toxic blow up. Like I started getting death threats, tons of like kill yourself messages, people telling me to cry more, like super hateful comments. Like, sure, criticism of the game, but like it's not, they're not my target audience. That's fine.
Right.
Um, uh, Direct attacks, and then it like got out of hand from there. I had people spamming graphic porn in my game's Discord server. I had people trying to review bomb the game on Steam. I had people spreading toxicity all over the Steam forums, and here I am, what, 48 hours, less than 48 hours after launching the game.
Yeah, completely
I'm trying to
frazzled.
hot fix
Right,
things,
right,
right?
right,
Like,
right.
I'm trying to hot fix, and also like suddenly it feels like I have these people like after me. I had to go put an anti-swatting notice on my house because I live in the U.S. and that's something you have to be concerned about
Yep.
here. Um,
I mean, when it happened to me, people came to my house.
I've been
Like,
I've been concerned about that.
yeah. I mean, the death threats, you know, it it's it's absolute absurdity. And we don't have to dwell on that. But I will say that over the years I've met quite a few of those people in person, and they definitely don't say that to you in person. And a lot of them have actually grown up and apologized. So I hope that happens for you.
Yeah, and I do feel with at least how some of the people have, I mean, it sounds like they're younger people for the most part, not all of them, but like the slang and KYS and things that they use are pretty not of my generation. How about that?
Well, it
Uh,
didn't work because you're currently sitting at um, very positive on
I
Steam.
I
So
am.
congrats.
Yeah, but if you look at the negative reviews, like half of them mention my TikTok video
Yeah, I
or
read
that.
through a good, maybe all of them actually, this morning, and you can't really say anything about or to those people other than what have you made, and that's actually not even really appropriate either. You know,
No.
you know,
Yeah. I for the
but you want to
most,
say it as a creator. You're
gosh.
like, I made this thing. You know, you made a post. They're not the same. We are not the same, right?
Yeah, and actually that's the thing that happened this week. Apparently some person made some like multi-part video trying to prove I didn't make potions. So I did have to say, no, I actually made it. Here's my like 4,600 commits on this project. I promise you. This is like, yes, I absolutely had help from other people. I'm not a good artist. I can't do composition and audio design well, but this is 100% my game, right? So that you never you can never win though, right? For me, I care so much more about you enjoying the game or your daughter enjoying the games. I've gotten such sweet emails about people being inspired. I had a woman messaged me that said that her son started playing the game, so she did, and she was, a middle-aged mom, and that she hasn't played many games, and she fell in love with it, and she's so glad that she can connect with her son over it, and that it means so much to her. Like, those are the things I try to focus on. And you know after all of this stuff, I've been mostly focusing on creating educational content, because to me it's about uplifting the next generation, whether or not they're age wise the next generation, but like the next people pursuing their dreams, whether that's game development or something else.
Well, but
um,
not only that, but you actually just like kind of like stood your ground at the lighthouse while the waves crashed in and then the storm ended, and you just went back to doing what you're supposed to do, which is support the game, be there for the audience. I mean, you have made so many videos, personal videos of you just, this is how this works in the game, and talking about crafting potions and all of it. And it's like, you know it was so explosive, and then it was kind of over. And what do you do then? You go back to doing what you were going to do, and going back to being the voice and the steward of this game for the audience.
Absolutely. Right now, I'm working on some UI improvements to help with browsing the magical card book. I'm gonna have a big patch come out before the Steam summer sale of quality of life stuff, and be working on console ports next with some nice little free DLC at the end.
That's amazing. Congrats on all that. I'm really happy for you.
Thank
um
you.
so what what did you take away from all of this? Not just the experience of you know getting sideswiped by EA and then being vulnerable, and then the excuse me, and then the internet exploding on you, but like also the development of the game, and this whole giant experience that's wrapped up into life with the you know everything from day one to right now of this game.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's almost been my whole game development career. So there's so much that I've taken away. I think the things that are most important to me is uh, learning to be empathetic with others as well as kind to myself. Especially if you're dealing with something extremely stressful, whether that is overwork or deadlines or toxicity and harassment. Like, giving yourself a break, understanding you're not going to be performing at 100% and not beating yourself up over it. I also learned the importance of considering others in game design, right? Like, designing a game for yourself works to some extent, but without really seeing how other people interact with it, um, you can't properly connect with them with the game. I think too many indies don't play test early enough or frequently enough. It is so valuable. You get so much information just watching somebody interact with your game and seeing where they pause or get confused. And I've leaned on surveys, but seeing them interact real time with it is invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot stress to anyone who's listening about the playtesting comment enough. I mean, that is like, that's everything. I remember I made this game Adrift, and I was really proud of it, and we got to a point where we were like, okay. And I brought a friend in who I respect greatly as a designer, and I sat there for 8 hours and watched him play the game. And when he was done, I said, "What do you think?" You know? And he's like, "Yep, you made a video game." And I was like, "All right, but I trust this person to tell me, you know, to be like that." And doing that early enough is so extremely helpful, because that led to so many different improvements. And I think as a developer, you really gotta like leave your ego somewhere else when you're making a game. It can be really dangerous to believe all your ideas are great and that they work perfectly. And it takes a real true creative and designer to be able to step back and have your work critiqued like that. There's this saying, well, the game doesn't ship with a designer, right? And it's like you hear that a lot when designers are, in a playtest, and it's frustrating seeing someone not do what you've, you know, meticulously crafted for them to do. And it's like, well, that's because it's not doing the right thing, and you need to see that and hear that and do it. So I think that, you're spot on about the playtesting. It's so important when you make games. Maybe one of the most important things, because at the end of the day, people are going to play it.
To be a good game developer requires a lot of humility.
Yep. There's
Absolutely.
actually nothing even more to add to that. That's it, right? Um, so you've been through this whole amazing experience, and you know you've you looked turned the bad stuff into a positive. It didn't stop you. It didn't break you. So what's next? Aside from what you've said about how you're
Yeah.
supporting the game, but like, what's next?
Um, I've actually been considering doing a bit of a different style of a game. I love story-based adventure games. My goal is to take a little bit of a break from that and to focus on enjoyable gameplay and mechanics in snappy loops. And so I'm looking at making a set of like party games, mini games in a party game style, um, that are silly and fun, that remind me of playing like the Pokemon Stadium and Mario party game sort of style games as a kid, but with additional flair to them and an interesting setting.
But not to take 10 years to do it.
No, no, yeah, fast iteration, definitely. Yeah, I mean, Potions is a story-based 8 biome giant world crafting based over 100 potions with like a 22,000 or 2,000 words of dialogue. Like it
It's a
is a
beast.
hefty game.
It's
Yeah,
a
you can
beast
beat it
as
in
your first
13
game.
hours. Yeah.
First game.
First solo published game. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something that is probably closer to a bunch of game jams with some polish on top. Not to say that it's going to be unpolished, but it's a lot easier to
Lower
make
stakes.
something equivalent, yeah, of
Yeah.
fun without having to get quite that in depth with so many systems and mechanics and things. So
So what do you think, as we end up here, if there's any aspiring young female game developers who don't really know how to get there like you did, what's your advice, to these budding creatives? Because there are millions out there, and we need more women making games like you. So, how are you gonna? What are you gonna tell them to rope them in? Because I think your experience doing this is a great tale, a curious tale, if you will. Sorry, that was terrible, but I had to
it
do it.
was good.
It was not good. Um, what are you going to say to these aspiring creators?
Just start, first of all. Like the number one way to become a game developer is to open a tutorial, open some modding software, get a piece of paper, whatever works best for you, and just start creating, exploring. of course, there's all this information about like the optimal way to come up with like the initial idea for your game or the optimal way to do a game design document, which is a little old school these days. But really, you will learn so much just getting into it. And that will help inform you of what you do want to make and how you want to make it. And from there, you can look up resources. There are plenty online, but never forget that the most valuable resources, even with AI and everything else, are still going to be other people because they will be able to share with you experiences that aren't recorded online and provide you with empathy when you need it too. Like, I think I'd have had a lot harder time with the harassment I faced without the wonderful support network I have. And I think game developers are constantly plagued by imposter syndrome. And I think the best cure for imposter syndrome is like with your friend who came and play tested Adrift.
Yeah.
Having somebody that you trust to give you good and honest feedback, because you can always temper yourself on that. It's really easy to be hard on yourself. Sometimes you do need to be critical of yourself, and sometimes you're being too hard on yourself. So having somebody you trust and respect who can be honest with you is an invaluable resource.
100% agreed on that. Um, well, thank you for coming on. It was amazing to talk to you. Um, really, really so proud of what you've done and really supportive of everything that you're doing and the way you handled that whole situation, you know, just turning it into a positive. It's really, really admirable and a really good example for developers and humans alike. So congrats again on all the success for the game, and thank you for coming on talking to me today. And we are all looking forward to what you're doing next.
Thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure.